They laughed, not the polite, tittering kind. They laughed like vultures circling a carcass, like my pain was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. All she got was the trailer park lot. Someone said. I could feel the words crawling under my skin, biting, stinging, but I didn't flinch. Not yet. I'm LaToya Jenkins. And if you'd told me a year ago that a dusty patch of Georgia clay would become the pivot point of my life, I would have spit my coffee across the courtroom floor and called you crazy. But here I am, standing at the edge of something no one, not Marcus, not his family, not the whole damn world, thought I'd ever touch. Divorce had a way of stripping you bare, of showing who you really are. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, countless sacrifices, and I walked out with a trailer park lot in rural Macon County and a court-approved shrug. Marcus's lawyer called it equitable distribution. His smug grin said it all. I had been handed scraps, and somehow that was supposed to feel like victory. Behind them, his family whispered, smirking because the woman they once whispered about as overambitious was now just a punchline. Poor LaToya. All she got was dirt. Funny thing is, I didn't cry. Not then. I swallowed hard, packed my things, and drove out to that forgotten lot while my kids, Troy and Vincent, stayed with my sister in Atlanta. I needed space, sure. But more than that, I needed perspective. I had been underestimated for so long, and I had learned early how to watch without being seen. Quiet observation was a weapon, patience my shield. The trailer sat like a relic, half swallowed by weeds, half propped by memories that weren't even mine. The wood groaned under the weight of decades. The air smelled of mildew and the faint tang of something older, something waiting. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, feeling the floor creak beneath me like it was greeting a visitor it hadn't seen in decades. The silence pressed in. The wind rattled the aluminum siding outside, whispering promises I didn't yet understand. I wasn't ready to sell. Not tonight. I spread my sleeping bag on the grimy and dusty floor of the cabin, listening to the trailer sigh around me, thinking about the laughter, the courtroom, the way the world had marked me less than hurt, yes. Underestimated, definitely, but not broken. I had a feeling this lot had secrets, hidden from the prying eyes of Marcus and his family. Something waiting. Something worth more than the sneers. And then I found it, a drawer hidden beneath the sink, swollen shut from years of neglect. I tugged at it, swearing under my breath, expecting roaches or dust, maybe a spider or two. But instead, the wood gave way, and my fingers brushed against something that made my chest skip. Papers. Old, yellowed, stacked haphazardly, like someone had tried to hide them from time itself. I didn't know it yet, but those papers were about to turn the joke the other way round. They weren't just remnants of forgotten days. They were a doorway, and as I held them in my hand, a shiver ran down my spine. This lot, the one everyone laughed at, might just be the place where I learned to laugh last. I remember the streets of Atlanta like they were stitched into my skin. The cracked sidewalks, the graffiti-tagged walls, the smell of sweet tea and exhaust mingling in the heat. I was 8 when Mama first took me to a Buckhead mansion, cleaning supplies in hand, the sharp scent of bleach clinging to her uniform. She moved with a kind of quiet authority, soft-spoken but unshakable, her hands working miracles on floors no one else wanted to touch. Watching her, I learned the first rule of survival. Keep your head down, but never let them see you sweat. Mama had a way of teaching lessons without saying much. I remember the day a white woman tried to stiff her on a tip, claiming she had done a half job. Mama didn't argue. She just looked at her, wiped the counter, and left without a word. I wanted to scream, to demand justice, but Mama grabbed my hand and whispered, "Justice isn't always loud, baby girl. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's waiting." That day, I realized life would not hand me what I deserved. I had to claim it patiently and strategically. School wasn't any kinder. Teachers who saw me as bright but ambitious in the wrong way often passed me over for opportunities. Friends would turn their backs when a rumor started or when jealousy brewed over something I had earned. Even family members sometimes underestimated me, dismissing my dreams as unrealistic. Each betrayal left a scar, but it also sharpened me. I learned to read people like open books, to see their weaknesses, and to store my anger like fuel for a fire that would one day burn brighter than they could imagine. And yet, despite the hardship, there was beauty too. Sundays at church, the smell of fresh biscuits and fried chicken, the hymns that rattled your bones, and stories of ancestors who survived chains and Jim Crow laws. Those tales were like whispers of resilience. I understood, even then, that survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about building, holding on to what others tried to take from you, and passing it forward when the time was right. It was in those moments, in the quiet observation of Mama's work and the injustices I witnessed, that I began to understand something vital. The world didn't know me, but it also left breadcrumbs. Clues, patterns, hidden doors. You just had to be patient enough to follow them. And sometimes those breadcrumbs led to land. Real land. Land with roots deep in history. Land tied to stories no one was telling. Land people assumed they could ignore. I never connected it fully back then. Not as a child, but something about the way Mama spoke of her own mother's life, her small, overlooked lot in Atlanta's outskirts, the land that had been in the family before debts, city plans, and white-owned banks slowly claimed it, lingered in my mind. It was a subtle echo, a whisper of possibility. That whisper never left me. It followed me through childhood, through heartbreak, through underestimation, and it resurfaced the moment I set foot on the trailer park lot in Macon County. That lot, the one everyone laughed at, wasn't just dirt. It was history waiting to be remembered. And as I traced my fingers over the edges of the old, rusted sink drawer, that same whisper rose in my chest again. Some legacies refused to be buried. The trailer was silent, save for the faint whistle of wind rattling the aluminum siding. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, flashlight in one hand, heart hammering in the other. That swollen drawer under the sink called to me, like it had been waiting for someone patient enough to pry it open. My fingers gripped the edge, wincing as the damp wood resisted. I cursed under my breath, tugged again, and finally, click, the drawer surrendered. Inside was a pile of yellowed papers, tied together with a fraying leather cord. Dust puffed into the air, and for a moment, I thought I had only found the usual trash left behind by decades of neglect. But the smell of old ink and aged paper was intoxicating, promising secrets. Carefully, I untied the bundle, unfolding the top document. A deed, dated 1923, stared back at me, Elijah Jenkins. My breath caught. Jenkins, our name, my name, echoed like a distant memory I didn't know I had. My first thought wasn't connection. It was disbelief. I'd never met Elijah, had no documented kinship, yet the coincidence gnawed at me. In Georgia, Surnames carried history, remnants of ancestors' survival, stolen legacies, and the shared threads of Black families scattered by time and injustice. Seeing that name tied to the land I now legally owned felt less like coincidence and more like destiny whispering. This story wasn't finished, and somehow, through me, it would be. I sank back against the wall, heart racing. Elijah's handwriting, precise, deliberate, and proud, spoke across time. He had staked a claim, fought to maintain it, and left behind evidence of something buried. And buried it had been. Notes scribbled in the margins hinted at a partnership with Harlan Whitaker, a name Marcus had casually mentioned once, but never in connection with anything meaningful. My pulse quickened as I skimmed more notes. Mention of white deposits and valuable clay veins caught my eye. Kaolin, the white gold of Georgia. Paper, ceramics, cosmetics, the kind of wealth people spent lifetimes chasing. And it was right here, under my nose, in what everyone else had laughed off as worthless dirt. I reminded myself, though, that this was still my land, legally mine after the divorce, the so-called worthless trailer park lot everyone had laughed at. Elijah's deeds, his journal, his ledgers, they weren't handing me inheritance. They were showing me the truth. The Whitakers had stolen, swindled, and buried value for decades, but the land itself, rightfully mine, held the keys. Once I could prove it, the mineral rights, the corporate entitlements, everything hidden beneath the soil would belong to me, and not by blood, but by law, strategy, and justice. My fingers trembled as I flipped through more documents, a faded ledger, additional deeds, and a leather-bound journal that smelled faintly of pine and old sweat. Anger bubbled under my skin, a mix of rage at Marcus and his smug family, and awe at Elijah. This wasn't just land, it was legacy, hidden wealth, proof that those who sneered at me had no idea what they were dismissing. My stomach churned as the magnitude hit me. The lot wasn't worthless. It had never been worthless. And now, suddenly, I understood. They had laughed at the wrong woman. I closed the drawer gently, almost reverently, and sat in the silence. My mind raced with possibilities, with the sweet, sharp taste of justice waiting just beyond my reach. Every instinct in me screamed that this lot, these papers, this discovery, they were the first move in a game no one had expected me to play. And as I flicked off the flashlight, letting the shadows swallow me, a thought settled in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting a history that had been buried in the weeds, about making sure the laughter that followed me today would be silenced tomorrow. Marcus's family had always carried themselves like royalty, a Whitaker crown pressed invisibly upon their heads. Even in casual conversation, there was an edge, a quiet assertion that everything in the world had been earned or stolen long before you had the chance to touch it. Growing up in Atlanta, I glimpsed them at church fundraisers, country club events, and the rare weddings where Marcus insisted I attend. Polished, poised, untouchable, the Whitakers thrived on whispers, on control, and on the power to make others feel small without ever raising a hand. Now, years later, I was beginning to understand the full scope of their reach. The laughter over my worthless lot wasn't just arrogance. It was a shield, a calculated dismissal meant to bury the truth before anyone could dig it up. And as I pored over Elijah Jenkins' deeds, the ledger, and the journal, the pieces started falling into place. Marcus wasn't ignorant. He knew the potential of the land. He had the advantage of family history, whispers passed down in boardrooms and private dinners, telling him which properties were valuable and which could be dismissed as empty. As I dug deeper into Marcus's family history, the Whitakers' long shadow over Macon County became impossible to ignore. Their wealth, influence, and ruthless preservation of assets were built on generations of quiet manipulation, and now, through sheer chance and legal maneuvering, I held the key to unraveling it. The land they had dismissed as worthless had been mine from the start, granted legally in the divorce settlement. They didn't need me to be related to Elijah Jenkins to try to keep it from me. They simply assumed no one would ever discover the hidden truth buried beneath the soil. The Whitakers were masters of concealment. Deeds altered quietly in county offices, mineral rights transferred through shadowy subsidiaries, and every conversation carefully monitored. Greed ran in their veins as predictably as blood. I remembered a cousin of Marcus, quiet and calculating, who once boasted about how the family had reclaimed properties in the 60s that should have belonged to black farmers. They didn't call it theft. They called it strategy. Every document I found about the lot's history now resonated with those lessons. I thought about the shared surname again. Jenkins was common in Georgia, yes, but seeing Elijah's name on the deeds and journals tied the past to my present in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't blood that connected us. It was the legacy of stolen land and deferred justice. I had the law, the documents, and the chance to right centuries of wrongs, and that was more than enough. It wasn't just historical, it was current. Emails I would later uncover hinted that Marcus had investigated the lot months before our divorce, likely learning of its hidden worth from family whispers. He let the worthless dirt story play out in court, expecting me to sell quickly, to relinquish control, and allow him a backdoor path to profit. He underestimated me. He always underestimated me. I sat in the dim trailer light, staring at the piles of papers and thinking about the family that had sneered at me for decades. It wasn't just about Marcus or even the lot. It was about the entire network of deception, secrecy, and carefully cultivated arrogance that had allowed them to thrive for generations. The more I realized, the angrier I became, and yet there was also clarity. I wasn't going to be rushed. I wasn't going to be the woman who sold out of fear or convenience. No, I would not let them write this ending for me. Not this time. The lot had value, hidden history, and power. And if they thought laughter could dictate my choices, they were about to discover that patience and knowledge were far more dangerous weapons than ridicule. I reached for the papers again, feeling a mixture of dread and determination swirl through me. Marcus may have believed he controlled the narrative. The Whitakers may have believed the lot would rot forever. But as I traced Elijah Jenkins' meticulous handwriting, a decision crystallized in my mind. I wasn't selling. Not yet. Not until I understood every secret, every family deception, every whisper buried in the soil. I would play their game, but on my terms. Morning light spilled over the trailer's peeling siding, warming the dusty cabin floor under my feet. But inside my mind, it was darker than midnight. I had stacks of papers now, ledgers, deeds, journals, but they were just the beginning. To understand Elijah Jenkins, to honor what he fought for, I had to dig deeper. I spent hours in the county archives, fingertips tracing faded signatures, squinting at marginal notes that whispered stories of theft, betrayal, and survival. Each entry felt like a breadcrumb, a secret waiting to be unraveled. Elijah's life wasn't just about this lot. He had been part of a small network of black farmers who owned land in Macon County in the 1920s and 30s, people who had endured the constant squeeze of Jim Crow laws, predatory loans, and unscrupulous neighbors. Many had lost everything over the decades, their property quietly absorbed into white-owned corporations or left to rot. I read about legal loopholes used to evict families, survey disputes rigged to favor wealthy outsiders, and mineral rights quietly stripped from unsuspecting heirs. Anger churned inside me, a mix of fury and awe. Elijah had tried to protect what was his, and I could feel the weight of his fight pressing down on me. Troy and Vincent weren't oblivious to the tension. They had been visiting with me more often, curious about why I spent so many nights scribbling notes, scanning microfilm, and making endless calls. Vincent, the younger one, asked once if I was fighting ghosts. Troy, a little older, nodded solemnly when I explained that some battles weren't visible to the eye. Their eyes, sharp and attentive, reminded me that this wasn't just my fight. It was theirs too, a legacy lesson they'd carry long after the papers were filed and the dust settled. I couldn't fail them. Between late nights in the trailer and visits to the public library, I started connecting dots. The kaolin deposits mentioned in Elijah's ledger weren't just a historical curiosity. They were a multi-million-dollar asset hidden in plain sight. Whitaker Kaolin Corporation, now a subsidiary of a national mining conglomerate, had likely profited off lands like mine for decades. If the Whitakers had manipulated deeds back then, I reasoned they probably continued the practice, quietly keeping families like mine from reclaiming what was theirs. Suspense built with every document I uncovered. There were old affidavits from surveyors, letters hinting at familial bribery, and a barely legible ledger that suggested some sort of back-channel deal. The legal loopholes that had once ensured Elijah's family lost the land now became my roadmap. If I played my cards right, studied the history, and leveraged every obscure law, I could challenge them and win. By the end of the week, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The trailer smelled of paper, dust, and determination, and the sun sinking low-cast long shadows through the sagging windows. I leaned back, Troy sitting beside me, Vincent quietly flipping through a newspaper, and realized something profound. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. For the first time since the divorce, the air in that trailer carried hope. I could fight back, strategically, methodically, and I would. I didn't have to face this alone, though I had spent years convincing myself I would. Naya, my younger sister, arrived one Saturday afternoon with her usual quiet strength, a laptop tucked under her arm and a determination in her eyes that reminded me of Mama. "You're not doing this by yourself," she said, setting up camp on the sagging couch. Her presence felt like sunlight breaking through the grime-coated windows of the trailer. She wasn't just family. She was my anchor, the voice of reason I needed when anger threatened to cloud judgment. Malik came the next day, a journalist with a nose for stories buried in the shadows. He had reported on local land disputes before, but nothing like this. He had a way of asking questions that made people slip without realizing it, revealing truths that even lawyers sometimes missed. Sitting across from me at the wobbly kitchen table, he flipped through my stacks of papers and whispered, "Latoya, you're sitting on history no one thought would see the light of day, and someone's already lying to cover it up." His words made my stomach twist. With Naya combing county archives and online records, Malik contacting former employees and tracking Whitaker corporate filings, I began to see patterns I couldn't have uncovered alone. Every email, every faded ledger entry, every legal note we unearthed was like a piece of a puzzle, one that connected Elijah Jenkins' fight almost a century ago to my current struggle. I realized this wasn't just a personal revenge story. It was a thread in a tapestry of historical injustice woven with greed, secrecy, and the quiet erasure of Black ownership. Troy and Vincent were watching us too, silently absorbing the intensity, their eyes flicking from my face to Naya's laptop. They asked questions now, subtle ones about fairness and history, and I answered as honestly as I could. They were learning that justice isn't always loud, that it often hides in documents, whispers, and the courage to keep digging. Days blurred into nights as we worked. Stacks of papers littered the trailer floor, highlighted and annotated. And then, finally, we found it. A document that had been tucked away in a nondescript folder at the county office, the kind no one would ever check unless they suspected something. A ledger, meticulously maintained, showing transactions, altered deeds, and signatures that didn't match. Evidence. Cold, undeniable, and damning. I stared at it in disbelief, my hands trembling. The first major confirmation that Marcus, or someone in his family, had orchestrated fraud, manipulating deeds, hiding assets, and trying to bury history. My breath caught, my pulse quickened, and a wave of vindication, mixed with fear, surged through me. This was the moment that could change everything, but only if I played it right. I leaned back, gripping the edges of the table, staring at Naya and Malik. This is it, I whispered. We finally have them. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew the fight was far from over. The real storm was just beginning. The phone call felt like stepping into a courtroom I hadn't yet entered. Cassandra Moore's voice was firm, precise, and commanding even through the crackle of my cell speaker. She was a litigator with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, someone who had turned what seemed impossible into landmark victories. "LaToya," she said, "you're sitting on decades of evidence, and they've been covering it up for generations. If we play this right, we don't just win a lot. We set a precedent." Her words sent a thrill through me, equal parts fear and exhilaration. We met at a small office in downtown Atlanta, walls lined with bookshelves heavy with legal tomes, framed cases that had reshaped communities, and photographs of victories won long before I was born. Cassandra spread out my files, taking in the deeds, ledgers, journals, and that first damning document Naya had found. "This isn't just about land," she said, tapping the stack with her finger. "It's about history, exploitation, and the legal erasure of Black ownership. They're going to fight, but they've underestimated you." We spent hours plotting every angle, how to present Elijah Jenkins' historical claim without losing legal ground, how to expose altered deeds and hidden accounts. Every minor detail mattered. Which county records could be subpoenaed, which corporate filings could be traced, which witnesses might corroborate a century-old story. Cassandra's eyes sparkled with intensity. We have leverage they don't even know exists. And once we make the first move, Marcus won't know what hit him. Meanwhile, Marcus was blissfully unaware. He walked through his life assuming the lot was worthless, assuming I would panic and sell. Emails intercepted later would reveal him casually checking property values, bragging to friends that the divorced woman wouldn't hold on for long. But he hadn't the faintest idea of the journal, the ledger, the deeds, or the connections we were uncovering. He was walking blind into a game he had tried to rig. As the day ended, and I drove back to the trailer, the Georgia sun dipping low behind pines, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. Troy and Vincent sat quietly in the back seat, sensing the shift in me. I didn't share the details, not yet, but they could feel it. This was no longer just a lost lot or a divorce fight. This was a reckoning. And then Cassandra's words echoed in my head. The first move is crucial. It has to be precise, undeniable, and public enough to force their hand. I knew what she meant. I could already feel Marcus stepping onto a path he wasn't prepared for. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I smiled at the thought of him tripping over his own arrogance. Because the plan was set, the pieces were in motion, and Marcus was about to make his first misstep. The first strike wasn't dramatic. No cameras, no shouting, just the quiet weight of paperwork and the soft click of email confirmations. Subpoenas filed, court documents drafted, notices served. It was all precise, meticulous, and deliberately under the radar. But for Marcus, the effect was immediate. I watched the news reports and online chatter later, seeing his face in photographs from board meetings and social events, smiling that same smug smile, completely unaware of the storm gathering behind it. By the end of the week, whispers had begun, subtle as a shadow sliding across a wall. Family members, friends, and business associates started murmuring about unexpected filings and questions in court. The cracks were appearing in Marcus's carefully constructed world. Troy and Vincent noticed, too. They sat beside me one night on the trailer's sagging couch, asking questions in quiet, almost reverent tones. "Mom, why does Daddy look worried?" Vincent asked, his voice small but sharp. Troy, older and more analytical, added, "It's like the rules changed overnight." I didn't have to explain everything. Not yet. They could feel the shift, the subtle power reversal. And I let them, knowing that even at their ages, they understood that justice didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it crept in quietly, reshaping the world around you. The tension built with each filing, every subpoena, every small legal maneuver. Marcus started calling people, checking records, even asking the Whitakers for advice. But it was already too late. The Whitakers, for all their experience, underestimated how far I was willing to go, how deep I had dug into the family history, and how carefully Cassandra and I had plotted every move. The once dismissive laughter that had followed me through the divorce was fading. Anxiety replaced it, subtle but unmistakable. Then, just when I thought I understood the battlefield, a package arrived at the trailer, addressed in plain, bureaucratic handwriting. Inside was a fragile, yellow document, so old the edges had crumbled. It was an affidavit, notarized in 1927, detailing transactions between Elijah Jenkins and the Whitaker family that contradicted everything Marcus had assumed about the land. Signatures, witness statements, and explicit mentions of mineral rights that had never been disclosed. I sank to the floor with the papers spread across my lap, heart hammering. This wasn't just a revelation, it was a weapon. Everything we had planned up to that point suddenly gained power, sharpened into something dangerous. Marcus had no idea the scope of what I now held. He had underestimated me completely, and with this document, the game changed. I folded the affidavit carefully, tracing the ink with trembling fingers. Troy peeked over my shoulder, eyes wide, and Vincent whispered, Is this like what you said about justice?" I nodded slowly, a fierce pride swelling inside me. Yes, this is justice. Quiet, relentless, and finally in motion. And as the sun dipped low outside the trailer, casting long shadows across the floor, I realized the next move wouldn't just be strategic. It would be decisive. The trailer felt smaller somehow that night, the shadows pressing in as I spread Elijah Jenkins' journal and ledger across the table. His handwriting, precise and patient, reached across decades, whispering the story of a man determined to protect what was his against the weight of a system built to erase him. I could almost see him, hunched over the paper by candlelight, mapping parcels, scribbling notes to friends, and writing letters to other black farmers who had lost their land. Letters begging them to keep records, to protect deeds, to remember their legacy. The ledger was meticulous. Every transaction, every payment, every effort to retain ownership documented, as though Elijah knew the world would one day try to take it all away. Hidden within were maps of the land, annotations marking the veins of kale and clay, the very veins that had eluded Marcus and his family for decades. It was a coded warning and a blueprint simultaneously. I traced the lines with my finger, heart pounding, imagining Elijah's pride and fear folded into every stroke. I leaned back in the sagging chair and thought of the countless stories I'd unearthed in my research. Families like mine, like Elijah's, stripped of land through loopholes, forged signatures, and silent intimidation. History had been cruel, relentless, and unforgiving. Yet here I was, standing in a small trailer in Macon County, armed with the evidence he had buried and preserved, ready to finish the fight he had started almost a century ago. Troy and Vincent hovered nearby, listening to me recount snippets of Elijah's letters. He never gave up, Troy said quietly. Vincent, eyes wide, asked, "Mom, does that mean you won't either?" I smiled, feeling the weight of generations in that simple question. No, I wouldn't. Not this time. The echoes of Elijah's perseverance resonated inside me, pushing me forward. Where history had failed him, I would succeed. Where injustice had prevailed, I would turn the tide. Late that evening, Malik called with news that made my stomach twist. A corporate filing he'd obtained through his sources mentioned a subsidiary account, a hidden entity connected to Whitaker Kalin Corporation. The details were scarce, vague references to mineral rights and undeclared assets, but it was enough. Hidden wealth, real, tangible value, carefully obscured, and waiting. My pulse raced as I realized this wasn't just revenge. It was restoration. For Elijah, for my children, and for every family erased by greed and silence. I sat alone with the papers, the shadows growing long, and whispered to myself, this time, justice won't wait another century. The stakes had escalated. The path was clear, but perilous. And as I traced another line on the hidden map, I knew that the next steps wouldn't just challenge Marcus. They would confront every lie his family had built to protect their fortune. History had whispered its warning, and now, armed with truth, I was ready to answer. Trust was a currency more volatile than money in this game, and I was learning it fast. Marcus had underestimated the value of deceit and overestimated his ability to control everyone around him. I discovered early that his circle wasn't as loyal as he believed. A former Whitaker accountant, quiet and nondescript, had approached Malik weeks prior, hinting at discrepancies in corporate filings. She claimed to be loyal, offering inside information against Elijah's legacy. But as I dug deeper, I realized she had her own agenda, a small attempt at leverage to secure her own payout. Deception in this world wasn't flashy. It was insidious. Subtle smiles, vague promises, coded language. Every person who had once laughed at me or worked for Marcus now became a potential liability or an asset. I had to navigate carefully, verifying each detail before acting, analyzing motives and weaknesses. It was exhausting mentally and emotionally, but every bit of patience paid dividends. Marcus, on the other hand, was unraveling in real time. His hidden accounts were exposed in our early subpoenas. Small withdrawals meant to finance hush deals, offshore transactions designed to cover up mineral rights, and bribes whispered to surveyors. All of it started surfacing piece by piece. I watched as his confidence, once unshakable, began to falter. Emails leaked to Malik revealed panic-stricken messages to Whitaker cousins, desperate inquiries about how to contain the fallout. Marcus had thought himself untouchable. He was discovering too late that every move he had made was now being traced. Meanwhile, the minor betrayal I had anticipated materialized perfectly. The accountant tried to manipulate a document, subtly redirecting attention away from the hidden wealth, hoping to protect Marcus while lining her pockets. But we were ready. Every document was cross-verified, every lead double-checked. She underestimated my preparation, and my team, what should have been a distraction, instead became proof of Marcus's sprawling network of deception, highlighting his vulnerability to courts, corporations, and public scrutiny. Troy and Vincent sensed the tension too. One evening, Vincent asked, "Mom, why does Daddy look different on the news?" Troy added, "He's sweating a lot, like someone just switched the rules on him." I smiled, keeping my voice calm. The rules were always there. He just didn't see them coming. I wanted them to understand that justice was patient, deliberate, and often invisible until it struck with full force. By the end of the week, we had compiled a dossier thick with evidence. Every fraudulent transaction, every bribe, every concealed asset pointed to one conclusion. Marcus's entire fortune was vulnerable. One court discovery could unravel decades of carefully hidden wealth. And as I closed the folder, heart hammering, I realized this was the pivot, the moment when history, strategy, and patience converged. And Marcus had no idea what was about to hit him. The air in the trailer felt electric. I leaned back, tracing a finger along the edges of Elijah's ledger, thinking of how far we'd come. The court documents were ready, the strategy set, and one small motion could dismantle the empire Marcus had assumed would survive intact. The first headlines hit like a thunderclap. Black woman uncovers century-old land theft in Georgia. They screamed, splashed across websites, newspapers, and social media feeds. I sat in the trailer, Troy on one side, Vincent on the other, watching the story spread like wildfire. Naya and Malik were on speaker call, tracking every mention, every comment, every thread. The city, the state, even national outlets were now watching. I realized then that this wasn't just a legal fight. It had become a public reckoning. Protests began outside the courthouse within days. Local activists, historians, and community leaders gathered, chanting, holding signs with Elijah's name, and speaking about Black land loss in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. I felt a mixture of pride and awe as I watched people rally not for me, but for justice itself, for history, for stolen land, for all the Elijahs erased by greed. The kids watched quietly from the trailer window, wide-eyed. "Mom, this is bigger than us. Troy whispered. I nodded, proud that even at 10 and 8, they could feel the gravity of what we were doing. Marcus, on the other hand, was unraveling. His carefully curated image, the family prestige, the wealth, all of it started to crumble under public scrutiny. Emails leaked, social media threads dissected his every move, and board members began whispering about risk, optics, and liability. His ego, once unshakable, became fragile, brittle, cracking under the weight of exposure. Family dinners became tense, calls from associates more frantic, and I could almost sense the panic vibrating through his messages. Meanwhile, our vision for the land started to take shape. Naya sketched out plans for Elijah Estates, a community space honoring Elijah's legacy, affordable housing, educational programs, and a center for teaching Black history and land rights. The community buzzed with energy, and I realized that this fight wasn't only about revenge, it was about restoration. Every meeting, every interview, every protest built momentum. We weren't just rewriting the story for me, we were rewriting history for generations. And then Malik called me late, one night, voice tight with excitement. LaToya, you're going to want to see this. On his screen appeared a new corporate filing, obscure and previously unmentioned, revealing an intricate web of shell companies tied to Whitaker Kalen Corporation. The depth of concealment was staggering. Marcus hadn't just hidden assets. He had woven a corporate veil designed to make the wealth untouchable. But now, because of the documents and filings we had uncovered, the veil had a seam, and we could see through it. I stared at the lines and numbers, the connections branching like roots across decades. The stakes had just escalated again. Marcus wasn't only fighting a court case. He was facing the eyes of the public, the justice system, and now a corporate labyrinth he had assumed would protect him. As I looked out at the growing crowds, the chants, and the energy pouring into the streets, I felt it in my bones. We were on the brink. Every whisper, every secret, every injustice was converging into a reckoning no one, not Marcus, not the Whitakers, would be able to ignore. And somewhere deep down, I smiled. The game wasn't just in the courts anymore. It was in the streets, in the hearts of the people, and in every document we were about to unveil. The trailer had never felt smaller or larger than it did that week. Stacks of documents teetered on every flat surface. Laptops hummed in every corner, and Naya and Malik moved with a quiet, relentless energy that matched my own. Cassandra Moore had called it the countdown, the final stretch before the legal strike that could dismantle Marcus and expose decades of Whitaker greed. We were closing in on the proof, the hidden Kalen rights, the altered deeds, the forged signatures, every single thread that tied the Whitaker legacy to decades of theft and deception. Troy and Vincent were quietly absorbing it all, their presence a constant reminder that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I could see the tension in their small faces, the way Vincent tapped his fingers nervously against the trailer table, the way Troy's eyes darted to mine whenever a new revelation arrived. They understood the weight of the fight in ways I hadn't expected. Between late-night discussions about legal strategy and whispered explanations of corporate maneuvers, I tried to shield them from the darkest parts of this battle while letting them witness that justice was possible even in the face of overwhelming odds. Every call, every filing, every subpoena had brought us closer. Cassandra's strategy was surgical. We hit them where it hurts, she said, and we do it with evidence they can't dispute. I watched her cross-reference ledgers, trace accounts, and map Kalen deposits that had been intentionally hidden for generations. The deeper we dug, the more desperate Marcus became. I saw it in his movements. Emails sent at all hours, frantic calls to corporate lawyers, and eventually a reckless decision that gave away the first crack in his fortress. He attempted to move assets, liquidate accounts, and rewrite documents that were already in the court system, all while claiming ignorance and attempting to maintain his carefully curated image. Each misstep was a silent victory, but it also raised the stakes. One wrong move, and everything he had built could collapse around him. I sat on the floor one night, Elijah's ledger beside me, the kids quietly coloring nearby, the air heavy with anticipation. My mind raced, balancing motherhood and vengeance was exhausting, and yet every shred of evidence, every historical thread tied back to justice. I reminded myself why I had started this fight, to reclaim what was stolen, to honor Elijah's legacy, and to show my children that courage and persistence mattered more than fear or intimidation. And then Cassandra looked up from her laptop, eyes intense. "We're ready," she said. "All the evidence points to one conclusion. Marcus has no escape. The court showdown is imminent, and when it starts, there's no turning back." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Every moment of preparation, every sleepless night, every calculated maneuver had led here. Outside, the Georgia sky darkened, heavy clouds casting long shadows over the trailer park, as if nature itself anticipated the storm about to break in the courthouse. The countdown wasn't just numbers anymore. It was the heartbeat of a reckoning, and tomorrow Marcus would finally face it. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, legal leather, and tension thick enough to choke on. Cameras lined the walls, reporters murmured in clusters, and the judge's gavel seemed poised, suspended in the air, waiting to begin the reckoning. I sat at the front with Cassandra and Naya, Troy, and Vincent just outside the spectator seats, their small hands intertwined, eyes wide as if they could sense the gravity before it even started. Marcus walked in last, confident at first, the smirk he always wore in public plastered across his face. But I saw it, the micro-expressions, the twitch in his jaw, the subtle panic behind carefully rehearsed composure. He had no idea what was coming. Cassandra led the charge, presenting our case with surgical precision. Deeds, ledgers, affidavits, emails, and corporate filings, every piece of evidence meticulously laid out. Elijah Jenkins' journal was read aloud, his words echoing through the courtroom as if the man himself had risen from the grave to testify. I felt a shiver run down my spine as Troy and Vincent leaned closer, listening wide-eyed. History, injustice, and resilience were no longer abstract concepts. They were living, breathing truths unfolding before our eyes. Twist after twist struck Marcus and the Whitaker family like lightning bolts. Emails revealed attempts to bribe surveyors, forge documents, and obscure Kalen deposits. Corporate complicity became undeniable. Shell companies, hidden accounts, and misrepresented mineral rights all traced back to Whitaker Kalen Corporation. Marcus tried to interrupt, tried to spin narratives, but the weight of evidence was relentless. Every lie crumbled, every defense faltered, and the courtroom's gaze, once respectful, now shifted to disbelief and judgment. The emotional tension was almost unbearable. Witnesses recounted family histories. Descendants of other Black farmers testified to the legacy of stolen land, and I could feel generations of struggle and pain amplifying the moment. Troy and Vincent squeezed my hands, their small presence grounding me amid the storm. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation, about restoring dignity and proving that persistence and truth could dismantle centuries of deception. When the final verdict was read, the weight lifted like a tidal wave. Marcus had lost. The fraudulent transfers were invalidated, the hidden Kalin rights restored, and the Whitaker corporate veil pierced. The victory was total, but the empowerment I felt was deeper than wealth or justice. It was ancestral, cultural, and intensely personal. As we left the courtroom, cameras flashing and community members cheering, I realized the fight had ripple effects. Whispers of the case were spreading through Atlanta, across Georgia, reaching activists, historians, and communities previously unaware of the stolen histories lying beneath their feet. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a movement in miniature, a spark for others to reclaim what had been hidden or erased. I glanced at Troy and Vincent, their eyes shining with awe and understanding, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the Georgia sky blazed with the late afternoon sun, a symbol of hard-won justice. Marcus's empire was fractured, but the real triumph was intangible, seismic in its impact, and I knew the consequences would echo far beyond the courtroom doors. The days after the verdict were surreal, like stepping into a world that was both familiar and unrecognizable. Marcus's empire crumbled in real time. His assets frozen, corporate accounts seized, and multiple legal charges filed. He became a cautionary tale whispered about in offices, churches, and community centers. Public humiliation followed him like a shadow, a stark contrast to the smug confidence he had once worn so easily. I could almost hear the whispers, all that pride gone. At home, the energy shifted too. Neighbors who had once avoided me after the divorce now offered congratulations, hugs, and cautious smiles. Even extended family reached out, some out of curiosity, others in quiet admiration. Troy and Vincent watched it all unfold, their young faces absorbing lessons about integrity, resilience, and the power of truth. I told them stories not just about victory, but about the cost and the work that comes with claiming justice. Meanwhile, Elijah Estates began to take form. Naya and I worked tirelessly to convert the 5-acre lot into more than just housing. It would be a sanctuary, affordable homes for single mothers like me, a community center honoring Elijah's legacy, and a historical preservation wing where the story of stolen Black land could be told for generations. The plan wasn't just about restoration. It was about education, empowerment, and ensuring the past wasn't forgotten. Each brick laid, each tree planted, each mural painted carried the weight of centuries of struggle and triumph. I spent long evenings walking the lot, imagining the lives that would flourish there. Troy and Vincent ran through the open fields, their laughter echoing like music across the clay-rich soil. I realized that vengeance, while sweet, had always been secondary to something bigger. Legacy, the lot, once laughed at, had transformed into a symbol of resilience, culture, and reclamation. Yet in the quiet moments, I found myself wrestling with lingering questions. Was justice ever fully attainable? Could stolen history ever truly be restored? Or was this victory only a small victory in a much larger, unfinished story? I pondered these questions as the sun dipped low over Macon County, casting long shadows across the beginnings of Elijah Estates. I took a deep breath, the scent of pine and fresh earth grounding me. I had come far, achieved more than I ever imagined. And yet there was still work to be done. Troy and Vincent tugged at my hands, pulling me from my thoughts, reminding me that life moved forward even as history lingered in our bones. And as I watched the horizon glow with the promise of a new day, I realized the fight for justice wasn't a single battle. It was a continuum, a series of steps, and I had taken the first of many that would echo far beyond my lifetime. I never imagined that a dusty patch of Georgia clay could rewrite the trajectory of my life. But as I stood at the edge of Elijah Estates, watching Troy and Vincent run freely through the open fields, I understood the full weight of what we had achieved. The laughter of my boys echoed across the land, pure and unburdened, a stark contrast to the snickers and whispers that once haunted me in courtrooms and living rooms alike. This was legacy in motion, justice not just claimed, but witnessed and inherited. I paused near the community center, the mural of Elijah Jenkins stretching across the brick wall, telling the story of a man who fought silently against a world designed to erase him. His journal, once yellowed and hidden beneath a sink, now had a permanent place of honor inside, alongside plaques detailing the history of stolen black land in Georgia. Every line, every ledger entry, every map had transformed from paper into power, from evidence into education. The weight of history pressed on me, but instead of crushing, it propelled me forward. Troy and Vincent tugged at my hands, their small faces glowing with curiosity and awe. "Mom, did Elijah really do all that?" Vincent asked, eyes wide. Troy chimed in, "And you finished it?" I knelt beside them, fingers tracing the map embedded in the floor of the center, and whispered, "He started it. I just made sure the story got told. And now it belongs to all of us." The lesson wasn't about vengeance. It was about resilience, pride, and using the tools of the present to honor the struggles of the past. I thought of Marcus, now a cautionary tale, and the Whitaker family, their power diminished, their schemes exposed. The courtroom battles, the media frenzy, the protests, they were all part of the larger picture. But the real victory lay in transformation, turning a neglected, overlooked lot into a beacon of hope, a tangible testament to what truth, strategy, and persistence could achieve. And then I laughed, quietly at first, then louder, letting it roll through the fields, through the trailer lot, through the echoes of decades of injustice. They had laughed at me once, dismissed me, assumed I would fail. But history had a funny way of rewarding patience, cunning, and courage. I had the last laugh, and it tasted sweet. Elijah's story, once buried, now intersected with ours. Our community, our culture, our children. It was a bridge across time, a reminder that justice delayed didn't have to mean justice denied. The land, the lessons, the laughter, they were all intertwined, forming a legacy that would endure long after we were gone. I watched Troy and Vincent run toward the horizon, their laughter mingling with the wind, and whispered a final promise. This fight, this land, this story, it was ours. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over Elijah Estates, I felt the weight of generations lift. I had fought, I had won, and I had ensured that history would remember not just the theft, but the triumph. Yes, they laughed first, but I laughed last, and this time justice had the final word.